Thank you, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. Actually, it looks like an Australian barbecue. The guys on one side, the girls on the other side. It really does, yeah. I look there. I'm in Anne playing bridge. That's brilliant, actually. And during the chatting session, I told her I'd been over to Italy to talk to 173rd Airborne Brigade and be part of their training on ready and resilient training. It's not very often an Australia gets invited to be able to train a premier brigade in Europe. They're the brigade that has been more involved in being on the ready for the problems we've had in Ukraine, actually. So it's a great brigade. And so here I am today. Before I launch into my presentation, I want to tell you how I came by going to Italy in the first place. When I was talking to the 3rd Combat Engineer Regiment here in Townsville about my Vietnam experiences and relating the Vietnam experiences to the Afghanistan experiences, then there was an American guy there who was a training major, and he was on exchange. After his posting to 3 Engineer Regiment, he then got posted to 173rd Airborne Brigade, which was in Italy. And then up came this resilient program, right, that they had to do. So he talked about getting me over there so that I could talk about the 3 field troop operations. And why? Because 3 field troops were posted to Vietnam in 1965. That was the troop I commanded. And we were posted to Vietnam, and we worked under 173rd Airborne Brigade. So that was the round circle and the relationship and all of that sort of thing, you know. It was great to be over there. So now I've introduced Vietnam. Can't leave you totally up in the air about what was happening in Vietnam. Have you heard of the Cu Chi tunnels? Huh? Anyone here been to Vietnam? Yes? Been down the tunnels?
Yeah.
Yes? Good? Okay, well, the unit that I commanded was the first unit ever down the tunnels, right? And we were before the Americans, before everyone, you know, and we searched out the tunnels. So the first Cu Chi tunnels that, which are not the ones that we go down, but the first Cu Chi tunnel headquarters, 3 field troop actually searched those. And up until that stage, no Allied soldiers actually searched out the tunnels and got all the equipment and gear and stuff and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to tell you about that first, okay? In fact, the way I'll do it is I'll talk about, I'll show some pictures, and on the way through I'll talk about some of the tasks that we had in Vietnam. Then I'm going to show you a documentary that was done 24 years ago. No, not 24 years ago. 1988. How long ago is that? 26 years ago. Yeah. Okay. Then I'm going to tell you a SAPA story. A SAPA incidentally means an Australian engineer, or actually a British engineer, an American engineer, anything like that, right? SAPA. So I'll tell you a story about SAPA Barnett. Then I have a break for about 10 minutes or so. A session on mental toughness, right, or resilience. Then we'll do an exercise on mental toughness, something that you've been involved with. Then I'm going to go through my story very quickly, and then we'll have any Q&A, concluding remarks, you know, those sort of things. Incidentally, if you've got any questions on the way through, fire them. Okay, it's the best way for me to answer those so that you don't have them ticking over inside your mind all the time. Okay. Well, we'll start with some of the 3 field troop tasks in Vietnam. So, showing this particular photo, this is one of the first operations that we went on, and this was in November 1965, and we 3 field troop were given tasks to support 1 RAR, and 1 RAR is 1 Royal Australian Regiment Battalion, which was therefore the 3rd Battalion of the brigade, 173rd Airborne Brigade. So it was a combined brigade, but the Americans were the boss, right? So our engineers were supporting the Australian battalion.
Sorry, how many would be in a battalion?
I'm sorry?
How many would be in a battalion?
About 1,000 soldiers, and I commanded 65 soldiers in Vietnam. I was a captain, I was 25 years old. Our tasks in Vietnam were things like booby traps, unexploded bombs, tunnel clearance, besides the normal construction type tasks that we had, which was everything from toilets through to cooking areas, roads, rubbish, all those sort of things, right? General things that you'd expect in a maintenance area. We were based in Binh Hoa. Now Binh Hoa is about 30 kilometres north of Saigon, and as such, Binh Hoa was an air base, and it was the biggest air base in South Vietnam. And 173rd Airborne Brigade, their task was a dual task. One was to be able to defend the air base, keep it secure, and the second task was to be the reaction force for the Third Corps area. The Third Corps area was like this. South Vietnam was divided into 4 corps. One coming down from the DMZ, that's the demilitarized zone, 1 corps, 2 corps, 3 corps, which included Saigon, and 4 corps was down in the Delta. Now, 3 corps area was roughly 200 kilometres by about 150 kilometres, right over from Cambodia to the sea. So it was a big area. What being a reaction force means is if there was anything going on in that area, right, and there was enemy action, then 173rd Airborne Brigade were tasked to go out and deal with whatever was going on. It was not very often that we were in base camp. It was more often that we were out, right? And it wasn't boring when we were out, because it was boring back in base camp always. Anyway, we used to go out by helicopter, and we used to also go out by APC. That's an armoured personnel carrier. Okay, so that's the way we used to go out. Now, when we went out, one battalion was always supported by engineers. So some of our engineers were going out with the battalion, right, on operations, right, to whatever area it was. And in one of these particular operations, we came across these holes in the ground. Now, up until this time, nothing had been done about the tunnels that we had come across in Vietnam. You see, our battalion had been there 6 months before us, and they said nothing had been done. What we decided to do was to go down the tunnels, investigate them, see what was there, and see what all the fuss was about. That picture there is, that's my boots. That's my staff sergeant holding my feet. The hole goes straight down. I had a torch in one hand, and I had a bayonet in the other, and I needed 3 hands because I needed a pistol as well. Now, what was the bayonet for? The bayonet was for clearing the ground, right? Clearing to make sure that there was no booby traps and those sorts of things. This particular tunnel was about 150 odd metres long, and it was it zigzagged all the way, and it was fairly big. So after I went in it, I asked another guy to come behind me, because engineers, I found, is always best if we worked in pairs. So then we went forward to where the tunnel came out, and it actually came out in a house, and there was a little trapdoor in a house. The house was vacant, there was no one in there. We knew that before we went down the tunnel. So this particular tunnel, you see, was an escape tunnel. So in other words, if the house was surrounded, people would go down the tunnel and through it. There are different kinds of tunnels over there. This particular one didn't have anything in it. It was just an escape tunnel. There are fighting tunnels, and there are safety tunnels, safety from being bombarded from the air, that sort of thing. I had 14 guys with me, and I made sure each one of them went through the tunnel just to experience it, because it is pretty frightening. Why did I go down first? Because you can never expect, right? We'd never done tunnel work. And you can never, ever, ever expect any of your soldiers to do anything that you won't do. So that's the reason I went first, right? Just to make sure. Here's the next one. This is what we did was we came back to camp. We knew we were going to clear tunnels, so what we did was we built a tunnel system in our base camp so that our soldiers could train on them. Now, one of the first things you've got to think about is if an enemy disappeared down the tunnel, it's their home, how are we going to get rid of the enemy? So what we found out about was that there was what was called a mighty mite, which was an air blower, right? What the Americans used to do was they used to go to any tunnel and blow smoke down the tunnel with this mighty mite, and then this smoke would disperse through the tunnel and show any other entrances. Then what would happen was that they'd come back and they'd blow up all the entrances, okay, to seal anything that was down there. That's how they used to go about it. Now, what we decided to do was we decided to clear the tunnel. So smoke was a good idea because it would reveal other entrances. But the second thing was that we wanted to clear the enemy out of the tunnel as well. Smoke wouldn't do that. So what we did was blow tear gas down. Tear gas. And when you blew tear gas down, it's awful stuff, And so that was a way to make it pretty safe. And then our soldiers would wear tear gas masks and then go down the tunnel. So we had to train in our base camp about that. Next one was
what's it like wearing the masks?
oh, bloody awful. And it's hot. And it's hot over there anyway. And it's all on your face, and you get your hands are getting stung. Everything's getting stung. But we did a lot of tear gas training way back. In the early engineers, every soldier had done some early engineer tear gas training, but not in tunnels. So that's the mighty mite machine. There's the tunnel sort of covered over, and it's blowing down smoke. What happened then was that we were on a particular operation, and this was in January the 8th in 1966, and it was called Crimp Operation, and this is the beginning of the tunnels of Kuchi. This particular operation, well, the video will show you a little bit about that, so I won't go into that. But what actually happened was that there were 4 guys killed. 2 killed, 2 wounded, sorry. And we didn't know where the shots had come from, right? We knew the area was, the enemy was around, because when we came in by helicopter, it was what's called a hot insertion. Now, a hot insertion is when you've been fired at as you're landing, and the helicopters come in, right? They roll like that, not landing, but about 3 or 4 feet above the ground. They roll, you jump off the helicopter goes back again, and it takes off, right, without landing. But it can be very quick, like you've only got a few seconds to jump off. And then you disperse, and then you gather, and then you reorganise, and then you move on. Well, as we were moving on, what happened, we were being fired at, there was shots, there was mortar, there was artillery, there was all sorts of stuff going on. There was gunships in the air, so we knew there was enemy around. So when the infantry started to clear the area, then what happened was that these two guys were wounded, and 2 stretcher bearers went forward immediately to tend to these 2 guys. No shot dead. We didn't know where the shots had come from. So after a while, the infantry cleared the area. There was an open area there as well, and all bush, and I'll show you the open area in a minute. But when the area had been cleared, they found a bunker which looked like an anthill. And in fact, that's one of my soldiers, but this is the anthill, this one here with the bushes on top. And in that anthill bunker, there was a slit, and that's where the shots had come from, right? So, as soon as that was found, that's when it becomes an engineer operation. What are we going to do about it, right? Because the infantry had found it, now we have to fix it. What happened was that we blew in the bunker, and when we blew in the bunker, there was the tunnel, right? There was the steps going down, the enemy had been in there, and that's where we had to go down. So what we had to do is we had to call in the mighty might, we threw in the smoke, we started searching it. Now this bunker actually was covering that area. See that open area? It was a perfect landing zone. And thank goodness we didn't land on it, because it was completely covered with booby traps in that particular area. What's happening, right? He's not feeling good either, and he can't even get past the guy to start pushing him out. So we attached a rope, another person went down, we attached a rope to the limp body to pull them back. And I tell you what, it's very, very difficult to pull a limp body back in a tunnel, and when you can't even push right from the front, you can't get past him to push him. So that was quite a challenge. And then we put another team down and they fainted. Then we put another team down and they fainted. And we were wondering what on earth was going on here. And what happened, of course, ultimately we realised it, I realised it, that smoke burnt up the air, and the air that we had followed with was not sufficient to be able to deal with the burning up of the oxygen, even though we kept on pumping in the air. This was one way, ultimately, that we found out that the Americans had never gone down the tunnels, because they never had this problem. So we knew that they hadn't gone down. They just blew them up as soon as they came across them. Well, this was quite a challenge for us, and then what happened ultimately was that we searched the area and we found another entrance into the tunnel, and we went down that entrance, and then we started and we decided never ever to use smoke again. It was useless. We used tear gas, but not smoke. So that was the entrance of the tunnel. There's the tunnel with some of the wire and that. There's a trapdoor inside the tunnel. There's this door. There's the size of the trapdoor. Incidentally, I took that photo myself. See that boot there? That's my boot. So I'm here like this, taking a photo. None of our guys could get through that one. We actually had to dig around it and then get into it, right? The Vietnamese are a very slight body, you know, and they were able to get into there quite easily. So that was the trapdoor. That's the standard trapdoor. Incidentally, when we found the trapdoor from underneath, right, and we could tell because you could see a little bit of daylight, right? It was, you never ever opened it, right? Because we had already found, after we blew smoke down the first tunnel, we found another trapdoor from the surface where the smoke was coming out. It had 17 booby traps around it. And if you opened the trapdoor, bang, right? So what we had to do was fire a couple of shots from underneath until our soldiers had heard the shots, and we positioned it and then found it from the surface. And then we cleared cleared the booby traps, and then went down the tunnels. Okay?
What were the booby traps?
Mainly grenades that were set in the trees and around the trees. They were with pins, so that there were things like cords. If you pull the trapdoor up, you'd have it attached to a cord, the cord to a pin in the grenade would then go off. You know, that sort of thing. Yeah.
What about mines?
Sorry.
What about mines?
We didn't find any mines in this particular area. We were dealing with mines later on, a lot more. We were dealing with things like grenades, hand grenades, and grenades like we had, the American grenade. But there was also a grenade whereby you had that was explosive on the end, like a bamboo stick coming down here and the handle. And then a cord running from it. Now, you'd throw the grenade, and at the end of the string would go out with the grenade, and then it would go off as soon as the string tightened. Sometimes the grenade had a fuse in it, which went for 3 or 4 seconds. But sometimes the grenade didn't have a fuse and it was instantaneous. So one of the guys, we had a sergeant in the assault pioneers. There was a sergeant in the assault pioneers of 1 RAR who actually pulled the grenade and was going to throw it, but it went off immediately. Right? So he was killed. So we never found out, all our time in Vietnam, 7 years, how they told whether it had a fuse in it or whether it didn't have a fuse in it. Right? Never knew. So that was one of the main things. Later on though, we were dealing with our own mines. I'll come back to that if you like. Just remind me to talk about mines again. Here's some of the gear that we got out of the tunnels. So a lot of gear, a lot of equipment. And you know, we got out over a half a ton of paper. Right? Thousands and thousands of documents. That's a photo of the crimp tunnels. Right? We actually went in here. We went in here, went along here, went up there, and that was when we decided, okay, there's got to be a better way. Right? So we found another entrance over here. We found this bunker. We went in here without, so all this area here was just tear gas and it wasn't smoke. And so we go along here and we find exits. So that was the diagram of the tunnels themselves. We worked there for about 5 or 6 days, and we cleared. We would have to go back in every day and clear it again because we'd find the enemy would be coming back in at night time. And when the enemy was coming back in at night time, it was a race to get the gear, to get the stuff out of the tunnel. And we saw stuff that we had to leave behind at some stage, and the next morning it was gone, you know, that sort of thing, yeah.
Did you ever encounter the enemy in the tunnel?
In this particular tunnel, we didn't, right? What actually happened was that the enemy withdrew. Because the enemy withdrew, what I was able to do was talk to the guys about making the tunnel our home and their home. In other words, we had the advantage because we were the aggressor down the tunnel. So that's what I talked about. It's a pretty difficult thing to sell, isn't it? Right? but that's what we did. So that we, I always had volunteers every time I came across the tunnel to be able to go down the tunnel. It was like their job, and they knew it, and they'll get them. Now, were enemy found down tunnels and confronted? Yes, there were. Right? Only on a couple of occasions. We did lose, a couple of years later, we lost a guy who was shot down the tunnel. There were lots of booby trap entrances and those sort of things that we found later, but not in this particular tunnel. They withdrew. And let me leave it until the video comes on and one of the enemy, the political commissar of that area, and the general of that area. He will answer the questions. We try different ways of working with tunnels and using lots. That's not smoke. That's diesel mist. Here are some very basic booby traps that we found earlier in Vietnam. But basic, but see this one here. There's a lot of those in this clearing that we did. Right? It doesn't kill you, right? But it maims you. You know. So these are the sort of things that happen. Initially very basic, but this we came across. They're very industrious, the Vietnamese. See the ones in the roof, right? Rice bags. Now we came across rice bags in Vietnam. There were, you know, stacks and stacks and stacks of them. You know, basically the enemy had been taking them, put them in the bush, and taking them from the villages, and we never ever found which ones of these bags had mines in or not. Right? You couldn't tell. You had to physically go over with a mine detector and find them first. So I don't know how they were it, but we couldn't work out a way. We physically found them, had to delouse them, and then take out the rice, because we never left the rice for them. That's a typical grenade made out of a piece of tin. There's that bamboo grenade I was talking about, right? The bamboo handle. There they are there. These three bamboo handles that are just in the middle of the road. Later on they got much more sophisticated, much more sophisticated. There's yours truly. Let's leave that and all the tasks and those sorts of things. We'll go on to the actual proper as well. And before we do though, what I want to say is that during our time in Vietnam, we worked in teams of 2, right? And ultimately, these teams of 2 were attached to platoons. Now, with an infantry battalion, you've got 4 companies. With 4 companies, you've got, within each company, you've got 3 platoons, right? Initially, when we started off, we started working on the battalion headquarters. But the problem was all these booby traps were found by the soldiers out in the field, right? So we had to get from the battalion headquarters out to the field. It took hours. So what happened was we finished up putting 2 teams of 2, which was called a sprinter team, with each one of the forward platoons. And then when something was found, the engineers were up there straight away, right? Now this was something that was against our principles, right? Concentration of effort was one of our principles. You don't break up engineers, but this is the best way to work. And guess what? That has been right through the army, right through the next 7 years, and even totally in Afghanistan, and today is one of the ways that we work, right? Calling splinter teams, mini teams, those sort of things. That's what happens. The other thing I was going to quickly come back to was mines and minefields. We had a huge minefield in Vietnam, and this minefield should never have been built. I could go on about this for hours, right? Should never have been built. Barrier minefield. The engineers were against it, but if you're ordered to do it, you do it. And what the enemy did was take out the mines. Now when the enemy took out the mines, right, you've got this, a mine is an American jumping jack mine. So you've got the mine coming, you tread on the mine and the mine jumps up out of the ground, you've got 2 kilos of explosive, right, that goes off about waist high, and it's a depth of 100 metres diameter. You won't survive, and it was bad news. Now those mines were used against us from 1968 to 1971, 1967 to 1971, because of the enemy, and that was really bad news. And it was our mines that were the bad news, and we got over half our casualties in Vietnam, and engineers particularly suffered the most casualties, right? The most casualties in Vietnam. I'm talking about percentage of population, percentage of guys there, and it was our boys that same thing in Afghanistan. Engineers, because the engineers moved forward to delouse these mines. The critical thing here is training, right? And making sure that the guys know that it's their job to do it. And they became really proud to do it, even though death often was the result. Okay, so what we'll do now is let's do this video, right?
So how much training would they have for that?
How much training? You mean
How many months?
Yeah.
well, 13 weeks, right? 13 weeks when they're in the School of Military Engineering. But then in Vietnam, we did a different thing. What we did in Vietnam was each team of 2, mini teams, splinter team, was made up of number 1 and number 2, right? So number 1 was the guy who had the experience in Vietnam. He had the experience. And number 2 was the new boy, right? So then when number 1 went home back to Australia, number 2 became the number 1. You with me? So how much training? Could be 6 months training, you know, on the job training, experience on the job, you know, that sort of thing. And that's the way we work.